Let me ask you a quick question. Anybody here ever hear of a guy named Matthew Sesich? Secich? Probably not. He's not super well known in the general world, but he is fairly well known in kind of the culinary world. Michael Sesich is a chef, and he was known for all kinds of restaurants all over the country. He was the head chef, I think, in a restaurant called the Oval Room in Washington, D.C. I Googled it right before church, and it actually closed down a few years ago, but it was sort of a highly regarded restaurant, back in the day, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so Michael Sesich was known for his, culinary craft and his excellence, and he was known for his ambition, right? He wanted to be awesome. I came across a little article about him, and this is what they wrote about him. They said, apparently, as he put it, he, quote, burned people, unquote. Meaning, he held a line cook's hand to a hot fire because of a mistake at Charlie Trotter's restaurant in Chicago, where Sesich was a chef from 2006 to 2008. Yikes. Sesich once said, 4 stars, that's all that matters. Right? In other words, 4 stars, people don't matter. Just the stars, right? Just the excellence. And if it means that somebody has to suffer for that excellence, then that's what it means. That's pretty messed up, right? It's one thing to want to be successful and to do your work well, and it's a totally different thing when you're willing to harm people in order to achieve that excellence, right? So we're going to talk today about that desire for excellence, and we're going to look at it in the context of the story of the Tower of Babel, a story you might be familiar with, and if not, that's okay. We're going to learn it today. This comes at the end of what is sometimes referred to as sort of the primeval history of Israel. So Genesis 1 through 11 is kind of like the first section of the book of Genesis, and we're finishing that up today. We're going to take a few weeks off for Christmas. We'll come back to Easter. We'll come back to Genesis after Easter. But this is kind of the first section. The reason it's called the primeval history is because it's stuff that happens before Abraham, right? It's stuff that's almost like prehistoric in the sense that it's harder to find like historic archaeological kind of evidence. We do find more of that after Genesis 12 and forward. And so this is still part of that primeval, or maybe it's primordial history of Genesis. The story itself, the Tower of Babel, comes after the flood, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? The flood where God said, he looks at humanity and he says, oh my gosh, the inclinations of the thoughts of the human heart is only evil all the time, right? And then the flood comes. He says, I got to start over. I've got to do something new. The world needs a fresh start. And so I'll save this one family, Noah and his family, 2 of every animal, start over. And then God makes a promise. He said, I'm never going to do that again. Never going to do that again. And there's some hopefulness for the future of humanity after that. And then, as we talked about last week, Noah gets drunk, passes out naked. His son looks at him, makes fun of him, and the brothers are like, what are you doing? And then Noah curses his sons, and the world falls apart. again, right? We human beings just sort of slide right back into their sinfulness, right? Into their tendency to be disruptors of shalom, so to speak. Right? Shalom, wholeness, well-being, goodness, beauty, harmony, and we disrupt it. After Noah and his sons have this little thing, the human race begins to expand, more and more people, and we read about that in Genesis chapter 10. We're going to skip over chapter 10 because it's mostly just a list of names. And then that brings us to the story of the Tower of Babel here in Genesis chapter 11. And so let me read to you the story of the Tower of Babel. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Okay, couple of things to touch on. First of all, there's a little note in my Bible here referring to verse 9, and it says, "Babel" sounds like the Hebrew for confused, right? So it says, that is why the place is called Babel. It was called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. We have the word Babel in English, don't we? Someone's just babbling on, meaningless gibberish, right? I don't know for sure if that word kind of derives from this, but I like to think that it does. I looked it up on Etymology Online, which is a fun resource, and it says we can't trace our word babble, oh, he's just babbling on, to this directly, but it said that this story may have contributed to the meaning of our word babble, right? We babble on. We babble on. Speaking of that, where does this story take place? We're told right in the beginning, as people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. And I have a little note in my Bible here that says Shinar, that is Babylonia. So Shinar was another name in the ancient world for the region of Babylonia. Babylon was the capital city of the region of Babylonia. Babylon was a real place, and we have found remains from the city of Babylon. It's not too far from Baghdad in Iraq. And so that's where this takes place. Now, if you're, whether or not you're a reader of the Bible, I bet you will be able to answer this question. When the Bible refers to Babylon, and it refers to Babylon a lot throughout the Bible, is Babylon referred to or spoken about as a place where good things happen or a place where bad things happen? Bad things, right? Babylon is never a place where good things happen. So, as people, the original readers of this story, when they read this and they heard that as people moved eastward, they found a place in Shinar, and they would have known Shinar, Babylonia, Babylon, they would have thought, uh-oh, something bad is about to happen, right? It's like this little trigger, a narrative device almost. It's like when you're watching a horror movie and the teenagers are hiding in the closet because they're being chased, and you hear scratching on the walls, and you're like, don't open the door, right? Something bad is about to happen, right? We understand how these things work. That's what they would have thought. Oh, Shinar, Babylonia, Babylon, something bad is about to happen. And something bad does happen, but not right away. The first thing that they do, right, is they say, we're going to build a tower. But actually, first they talk about making bricks and baking them thoroughly. And then it says that they used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar, which is an interesting little detail. Some have made the argument, and it may be accurate, that there's something wrong with that, right? That it would have been better if they had used stone instead of bricks and maybe something else instead of tar for mortar. But I wonder, there's this part of me that wonders if maybe it's meant to be kind of a good thing, that maybe it was a good thing that they were being creative with the resources that God had given them. Oh boy, we don't have any stones around here, or not enough for this thing that we want to build, and so let's if we do this thing with the mud and bake it in the sun, it becomes pretty strong, and we've got bricks. And part of me wonders if God looked at that and said, hey, good job, way to go, guys, you're being creative, you're using those brains I gave you, and you're using the imagination I gave you, and you're using the things that I've given you to do something brand new in the world. Awesome, way to go. Maybe. See, the problem wasn't that they were building a tower. right? The problem was their motive for building a tower. Their motive says they used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build a city. Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. What was their motive? Their motive was self-interest, right? We might use the word selfish ambition, right? Let us build this tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves, so that people will look at us and say, wow, those builders of that tower are amazing. That's what we want. We want people to be so impressed by what we're doing. Yeah, it's all about me. That's part of the problem. The other problem, it doesn't seem like a problem when you read it. At first it says, otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Well, what's wrong with that? To be scattered doesn't sound like a good thing. I mean, maybe we kind of get, okay, yeah, you don't want to be scattered. You want to stay there. The problem with that is that we have to think back to God's first command to the first human beings, Adam and Eve, which was, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. After the flood, God gave that very same command to Noah. Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. But these builders of this tower said, no, we don't want to be scattered over the face of the earth. Kind of a fortifying mentality. We're going to stay right here. We're going to build our city. We're going to build our tower, show everybody how great we are, and we're just going to stay right here. We are not scattering. We are not filling the earth. There is a resistance, right, to God's call, to God's mission, right? God's mission at that time was fill the earth, right? Bring the goodness, the goodness of God into the whole world as you bring out of the world all the good that I have, all the potential for good that I've put in there. Don't just limit it here to this place. Fill the earth. They didn't want to do it. They wanted their name to be great, and they wanted to stay right where they were. Okay, right, the motive would be, as we said, self-interest, selfish ambition. And so I want to talk about that for a little bit. One of the things that we can bet, I think it's a pretty safe bet, that was that in building this tower, they would have used forced labor, right, slavery. The pyramids were built with forced labor. The ancient Hebrews were slaves that may have built the pyramids, but certainly built stuff for the Egyptians, right? It's just the way that human beings have worked throughout, world history. Those with power force people with less power to do things that will enrich the people with more power, right? And so they would have certainly used forced labor to build this tower. The danger of self-interest, selfish ambition, wanting to make a name for ourselves is that we lose our capacity for compassion, right? We lose our capacity to be able to love the people around us, because when it's all about me, right, like Michael Sesich, then it doesn't matter what happens to you as long as I succeed, as long as I look good, as long as you are impressed and everyone else is impressed by me. When selfish ambition and self-interest is our primary motivator, we lose our capacity for compassion, right? The more we focus on what we want, the less we're able to even be aware of what others need, right? The more we focus on what we want, the less we are able to be aware of what others need. The other part of this, similar to the builders of this tower, is when selfish ambition is our motivator, it's all about determining our own destiny, right? As opposed to being open to however God might lead us. No, this is where I'm going. That's what I want. I'm going to get there one way or the other, rather than saying, okay, Lord, where do you want to lead me, right? What do you want from me in this life? Let's just say, some of us are more achievement-oriented than others. Some of us maybe struggle with this more than others, but we've all got some of that. We've all got a little bit of this selfish ambition in us. One of the interesting things about the tower was that it probably was a tower something like this. Actually, let's go ahead and look at this here. Next slide. First picture. There you go. So this is an ancient Babylonian ziggurat, right? Found somewhere in Ur, or Uruk is what the caption for this picture said. So somewhere in the Middle East, maybe that's the tower. I don't know. Maybe that's the tower that inspired the story. It's hard to tell what this tower looks like here, but there's a diagram of what it would have looked like, right? Something more like that. And to us, we look at that and we're like, well, that doesn't look that big, right? We're used to skyscrapers, right? We are used to, I mean, even our towers in San Diego are not like the most amazing skyscrapers in the world. They're tall, but they're not like huge. You go to New York or even LA or Dubai, right? And those things are humongous. This is nothing. But in the ancient world, people would have looked at a tower like this and would have said, whoa, that is so big compared to my little hut, right? That building is enormous. And here's what the purpose of a tower like this was. This was a tower, just as they said here, right? A tower that reaches to the heavens. The purpose was to be able for the powerful, the wealthy, the elite of the society go to the top of that tower and connect with the gods. For humans to go up to the heavens and a place for the gods to come down to earth. So here's the interesting thing. It kind of worked because the Lord came down. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the people were building, right? They built a tower. God took notice and said, let's see what's going on. Let's see what's going on here, right? And God said, this could be a problem, right? Not because of the tower that they're building, but because of the motive with which they're building it. Now, God has been through a lot with human beings up until this point, right? Adam and Eve turned their backs on God. Cain, right? Their sons, Cain and Abel. Cain killed his brother Abel. You've got the story of Lamech, who boasts about killing someone for merely wounding him. Then you've got the flood story and the thoughts of the inclination of the thoughts of the human heart is only evil all the time. And then after the flood, even with that fresh start, Noah and his sons slide right back into sin. And here we go again. Here we go again. Trying to build something, not because the building of it is bad, but because we want to make a name for ourselves, right? Rather than building in a way that brings glory to God, they're building in a way to bring glory to themselves. And they are resisting, right? Resisting that call of God to fill the earth, right? To go where God is sending them, to go where God is leading them. And so God remembers, maybe he saw a rainbow, and he's like, oh, that's right. Okay, I put my bow aside, right? I put my weapon aside. No more destroying the earth. Let's get creative. What could I do? How could I do this? What if I mixed up their languages? Oh, let's see what happens, right? So God mixes up their languages. The people are unable to communicate and cooperate, and they go out and they scatter and they fill the earth. Wow, right? God's will is done in the end. Maybe not the way that God intended for it to happen, but God's will is accomplished. Okay. Right, so that's kind of the story here. The question that we need to ask for ourselves is, what tower am I building? Right? What tower am I? Everybody's building a tower, right? Maybe it's your career, maybe that's your tower. Maybe you're building a business. Maybe you're building your family, right? Maybe you're building some kind of a neighborhood group or something, right? And maybe the tower you're building is your faith, right? And you know, your understanding of God and Christianity, right? None of these things are bad things. These are all good things. Nothing wrong with building a tower. Nothing wrong with building a career or a business or building a school or your family or your faith or a portfolio or whatever it might be. Nothing wrong with that. The question is why, right? What tower are you building and why? Why? Probably for me, right? It's really hard to say, I'm building it for this very noble purpose. There's at least some. Now, I'm not saying that it's all bad. I'm not saying that that there can't be any, okay, yeah, I need to meet my needs, I need to meet my family's needs, right, through this tower that I'm building, whatever that tower might be. But I think it's important for us to reflect on how much of it is for me, so that I may make a name for myself, so that I can kind of fortify here and build something that is strong, and I don't have to feel afraid or insecure because I've got this tower that I've built, right? What's our motive for building whatever tower it is that we're building? I have a confession to make. There was a time, there's still a little bit of that, there always is, when I was a young pastor, I wanted to be impressive. I was called to a little church here in San Diego, and about 100 people, which sounds really big now, but it wasn't at that time. If we had 100 people here, it'd be like, man, this is huge, this church. Anyway, and I was just like, man, I'm going to go in there. You know, I'm like 34 years old. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to make this church awesome, right? We're going to grow this church. We're going to have amazing music, and it's going to be so many people in youth and children's ministries, and we're going to fix up this campus. And every year, our attendance went down just a little bit. 99, like 100, 99, 95, 92, 86. I'm like, ugh. There was a moment kind of towards the end of my time there, I was so frustrated. And I would go, my office was very close to the sanctuary, and I'd do a few standing breaks now and then. I go in, I just kind of walk around the sanctuary, as though I was walking around here, getting a few steps in. And I remember praying, Lord, how do I get more people to show up, and how do I get them to give more money? And as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, sorry, that was a bad motive there just now, right? That's the wrong thing to be worrying about. I've shared that things at that church fell apart, a year of false accusations and investigations and exonerations. And when I came through that, I was just like, what was all that for? That was the tower that I was building. What was I building that tower for? I was building it for me. Now, you wouldn't have known that. Some of you knew me at that time. You wouldn't have said, wow, Markus is such a jerk. He's so arrogant and self-centered, right? You wouldn't have thought that. But there was some of that. There was inside of me. It was like, I loved people. I loved God, right? I'm still the same person, but inside there was this if we do this, it's going to look so good. And people are going to, other pastors in San Diego that I know are going to be like, wow, Markus, great job with that church. Thank you, right? That was a big part of my motivation. When all of that fell apart, I was just like, what was that for? And it changed the way I think about ministry. It changed the way I think about church and the purpose of the church. Too often, right, we think that churches exist for their own sake. That's the danger anyway. When I think about churches, I want to talk about churches for a moment. There are two traps that churches can fall into. The first one, and these are not my words, but the first one that I think of is what we call self-propagation, right? You can think of the big churches, the ones that are all about, we got to get as big as possible, we got to have excellent programming, we got to have stuff for all the kids, we got to have a great band, we got to have great lights. And my wife and I visited a church maybe 10 years ago, one of the big ones here in San Diego, and we got there early, and so the service hadn't started yet, the lights were still on, the house lights, and she looks around and she says to me, why is it so smoky in here? I was like, oh, well, it's for the light show when the service starts, And she's like, oh. She goes, maybe I'm more traditional than I thought. Right? But the self-propagation is all about how can we become as big and impressive as possible? How can we get as many people to show up at this church? And sure, of course we want to do good things, and there are good ministries, and I'm not saying that it's all bad that comes out of churches that tend to be motivated by self-propagation. But there's a lot of motivation, self-propagation, so that we may make a name for ourselves, right? That's one of the traps that churches can fall into. The other trap is self-preservation. These are the smaller churches, right? These are the churches where folks are maybe getting older and passing away or becoming homebound or moving out of town. And the church that I was at, prior to this was self-preservation. In fact, the last church that I was at, the one out in the Imperial Valley, I had been guest preaching there semi-regularly for about a year before I became their interim pastor. And after church once, I may have shared this with you before, but after church, I offered once to just sit with their elders and kind of bounce ideas around with them. And so we did, and they were so anxious in regard to people coming to church on Sunday because they were in self-preservation mode, right? Their attendance had been going down. And I said to them, well, listen, you guys have a nice campus. It's small, but it's clean, and you've got a kitchen, a fellowship hall, some classrooms. What do you guys do besides church on Sunday morning? And they said, yeah, nothing, actually. I was like, well, what else could you do? And that, for them, got their wheels turning. They started throwing ideas around, and eventually they started this food pantry that has been in existence now for 6.5 years. And it changed the way they thought about themselves. Right? They didn't get bigger. And one of the best things for me at that time was there was no pressure to try to grow the church. The town was only 2,000 people. It already had 5 churches. 2,000 is smaller than a lot of mega churches, right? It wasn't going to grow, maybe 5, 10, 20 people, right? But it wasn't going to grow significantly. And so the purpose of that church became not just what we do on Sunday morning, right? Sunday morning is important too, of course, but it's also how we love our neighbors here in this community, right? When we focus on self-preservation, right, it's still a matter of self-interest. How do we survive? How do we get back to a place where we can maybe make a name for ourselves? And I'll just reflect briefly on our church. In some ways, we've been in self-preservation mode. And I just want to say it's not necessarily a sin, but it can be unhealthy if we get stuck there, right? We've been surviving after COVID. Things were very hard here. We had that preschool flood, and how can we just get through this time? And in some ways, I think God's mission for us was do your best. Do your best to keep loving and serving each other, even though things are hard right now. It feels like we're coming to a place now where, you know what? We're okay. We're okay. Now, how is God calling us to be the people of God in the world, in this neighborhood, in this region? What is our mission here for this next season of this church's life, right? Feels like that's where we're at now. So sometimes we try to survive. That's okay. But really, rather than being trapped by self-propagation or self-preservation, I think the third option is just service. That's my word for it, right? And I'm sure we could come up with other words or other ways of describing this, but our motive is not meant to be selfish ambition, self-propagation, self-preservation, but serving, right? Amen. Jesus said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the other one is just like it, he said. And the way he says it in Greek, it's not like there's this one and then there's this one. He said there's this one and the second one is just like it, of equal importance. Anybody know what it is? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's our motive. And we love God by loving our neighbor, right? You can't love your neighbor if you don't love God. You can't love God if you don't love your neighbor. That's the motive that we are called. So when we're building our towers, and we're all building our towers, and this church together, we're kind of building a tower. The problem isn't building towers. The problem isn't building the things that we want to, do in our lives. The problem comes when the motivation is all about me, right? Self-interest, selfish ambition. How good do I look? And when that becomes our primary motive, we lose our capacity for compassion. We lose our capacity to love. We grow in our capacity for love when our motive is loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves, even through the towers that we're building. Our towers can be places by which people experience the healing and wholeness of God, right? When God is at the center of that. I was thinking about that song, right? From our hearts to the heavens. Was it Jesus be the center, right? This tower was built as a place to reach up into the heavens. But it's not the towers, right, that connect us to the love of God, the goodness of God. And it's not through our towers that God comes into the world, right? It's from our hearts to the heavens. And as we let our hearts be transformed from hearts that are focused on selfish ambition, on what's best for me, to hearts that are open, right, to the way that God wants to love the world, and we become vessels of that love. That's when our lives change. That's when the world begins to change. So, Matthew Sesich, remember him, the chef. Terrible person, it sounds like. But something happened to him, and he became a follower of Jesus. Here's what this article says about him. Quoting him, it says, "I went home one night and got on my knees and asked for forgiveness," he said, "for his lack of compassion for others, his nights with restaurant friends and a fifth of Jim Beam with a side of Pabst Blue Ribbon, for that overactive ego. I gave my life to the Lord, which I never would have imagined in the heyday of my chaos." And then guess what he did? He stepped away from this brilliant culinary career of his, and he moved to a little town, Unity, Maine, 2,000 people, and he opened a little restaurant there, and he just loves and serves the people in that town through that little restaurant. Right, here's a guy who realized that his life was nothing but selfish ambition. There's another line in one of the songs which comes out of the Psalms that says, if I can't remember exactly how it goes. If we build our house, how does it go? When we don't, okay, sorry. If we don't build the house with the Lord, the laborer builds in vain, something like that, right? Thank you. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders build or labor in vain. That's right, right? So here are people in this story. They were building this tower without God. God was not in it with them. The invitation for us, okay, here's the invitation. I think the invitation for us is just to start reflecting on what tower am I building and why am I building it? What tower am I building and why am I building it? And look, nobody's perfect, right? I get a little giddy when there's more people in church on Sunday, right? It's, hey, good. And I feel a little bit like, oh, where'd people go when there's less of us here, right? There's still always going to be some of that. But I think the invitation for us is to hold it before the Lord, right? To hold it openly for God to do with as he will. You know, you don't have to be a big church in order to participate with God in the healing of the world. You can be a tiny church. You can be 10 people. You can be 3 people. And you can say, we're gonna love our neighbors in this particular way that we feel like God is calling us to love our neighbors. You don't have to be a big church for that, right? So what tower are you building? Why are you building it? And this is the next step. This is the harder step. Well, first, what's God inviting me to here? Is God asking me to invite him into the building of this tower, where God is saying, hey, I love the tower you're building, keep it up. Let me take the lead in building this tower. Or is it possible that we're building a tower and God says, not that one, not that tower. I want you to build a different tower. And that's really hard. Right? And I'm not saying you're going to decide today if you feel like that's what God is saying, but it's important for us to think about these things, right? What tower am I building? Why am I building it? Is God saying, let me join you in the building of your tower? Or is God saying, I want you to come over here and I want you to build this tower instead? Lord Jesus, these are hard. This is the hard part when it comes to following you. It's wonderful that you love us, that you have given yourself for us, that you came into this world for us, that you constantly reach out with love, and you're always there for us. That's almost kind of the easy part in some ways. The hard part then is surrendering and letting go of our control over the towers that we build in our lives. And so, Lord, wherever we are in regard to our towers and to you, just help us to be open to you. And maybe that's just the first step, to say, okay, Lord, I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to listen. And maybe some of us are at a point where we realize, oh yeah, I'm building the wrong tower. Lord, whatever that means for us, setting aside whatever it is that we've been building and then saying yes to you wherever you lead us, or maybe experimenting or exploring new things that you might be calling us to. Lord, just give us the courage to let go of the things that you're calling us to let go of and to take hold of the things that you're calling us to take hold of. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.